I want to discuss an article today by Tucker Carlson about the recent Easter terrorist attacks in Sri Lanka, where the last I heard, at least 300 people have been killed and more were injured. It was suicide bombings that appear to be coordinated. Like 3 churches were hit, as well as hotels. I believe was the other main target. And Tucker Carlson's speech that he did on the air the other day was our leaders ignore Christian persecution because they believe Christians are the problem. And so I want to give this article its due and have a discussion of the points that he makes and then respond to them. The whole thing is full of a mix of eloquently delivered quasi points with underlying problems and assumptions that are really gross. So I want to break it down a little bit. So he begins by stating that the authority refuses to speak clearly about the attacks on Christians, and his way of illustrating that point is to cite 2 people who are not in the authority, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, because they both tweeted out using this language the attacks on tourists and Easter worshippers. That's the language that they used. For example, what I wrote here is that the Republicans who have for decades, for as long as I was politically conscious, have thrown shit on the left for being language police. Boy, they're starting to sound really, really language police-ish. Very militant. Remember Ilhan Omar's comments where she mentioned it's still going on. The memes are still flowing, like so many rivers from the mouths and computers of fools. Where this comment that made, it made some sense inside of the context of what she was saying, where they hone in on the language itself and then make sweeping points. So that's the first thing I want to point out is the authority is not refusing to talk about Christians, because the people that he's talking about, Barack Obama's not the president anymore. Hillary Clinton, most real leftists see her as, at the very least, like a problematic corporatist. Excuse me. So, I want to move on and I want to read this quote. So, Easter worshippers, Carlson says, why don't you say Christians? Nobody worships Easter. There's a reason, of course. Euphemisms are never accidental. Our leaders believe Christians are the problem, that they are the dangerous ones. They can't be trusted. Tell them the truth and they might go crazy and organize a new crusade, unsheath their swords and march on Jerusalem. You never know with Christians. And he said this, I delivered it sort of in the same way that he did, but he was much more forward with the attitude when he was saying that. He's meaning that this is ridiculous. I do think all of those things. But I think them unironically. And so I want to talk about why I think those things and why I think that the point that he's making isn't really a point. So I would have said Christians to begin with. Let's point that out. I would have chosen, if I was a politician, to label this as a terrorist attack specifically against Christian worshipers on Easter. It is obvious, and it does go without saying, but I would have labeled it in that way for a couple reasons, mostly just because it's true, but beyond that, there are some reasons that we can get to later. The first thing that I want to point out with this is Christians are dangerous. I mean, the first point that I can make on that score is, without being a dick intentionally, I think the most charitable way that you can say it is that if you at all care about history, the Catholic Church, it's problematic to describe the Catholic Church or Christians in general as a non-threatening entity. If you look at history, I think that's the most charitable way that I can say that historically they have been dangerous. The next point is Christians are dangerous to gay marriage, to LGBTQ rights. They are dangerous to the planet with this ideology of God made everything for me to consume. I can kill all the animals and eat them and not care about where my food comes from. I see Christians like this all the time. Not to say that there are not groups of Christians that are eco-conscious, but they are still in the minority. So those are the first 2 points that I want to make. The last one on that score is they're bad for the global wealth problem. We just saw one building burns, and the Christians ostensibly, the billionaire Christians and so on and so forth, they were literally tripping over themselves to put money into this one non-essential building repair. So the next thing is Christians do start crusades. That's where the term comes from. And so their ideology makes them interpret true things in bad faith for the purpose of propping up their self-interest and tribalistic instincts. That's a reality. And so it's not, I don't think that politicians, that some people are not wanting to label these as attacks on Christianity. It's because they know that for reasons that are not justified, the vast majority of the American Christian public, especially on the right, is already buying into a narrative that it's Christianity versus Islam. And they know that the more directly they talk about it, and again, I'm not saying that I would be indirect in this way. I'm saying that the reason they're doing it is a real thing. People are. I used to be one of the people that would say, well, you should be able to criticize Islam however you want because it's not a race. It's just a set of ideas. And in the last couple of years, it seems like I was wrong on that score. And Islamophobia is basically just racism, because it's when you really dig into it, there are a lot of bullshit assumptions. So let me continue here. So so just like 9/11, the ideology machine is going to use this truth of that it was an attack against Christians, and they will interpret it in bad faith to justify the continuation of illegal offensive wars in the Middle East. Christian politicians will use this as an excuse to prop up and continue funding the military-industrial complex, to funnel money into Lockheed Martin, to funnel money into Blackwater, which is literally a hyper-Christian conservative mercenary group that we outsource and privatize huge amounts of our military actions in the Middle East to, and they routinely commit atrocities. They routinely do things that are super evil, super bad, and that we then say, well, they were contractors. Like, it's not, they're not answerable to us. So that's all of that's true. And then they're already on a crusade of bigotry against Muslims in general. And there already is a problem with Muslims being abused and otherwise persecuted in our country. And look no further than Ilhan Omar, who has the audacity to merely speak a few truths here or there to power. And look what they've done. Look at the smear campaigns, the overt racism, the hatred in general that's been unleashed on her. So I think Carlson simplifies the issue, and then he tries to create a focus on the dishonesty, which I agree it's slightly dishonest. It's leading in the way they chose not to say Christians. Instead, they say Easter worshipers. I agree that is some form of dishonesty. But the magnitude of that wrong against ignores the fact that the reason that they would do that is totally legit. It's totally well-founded in the actual slathering, fucking hideous desire that large swaths of the American people have to just become totally unmasked racist against anyone of the Islamic faith. Here is another couple quotes from Carlson. So nobody cares that so many of our allies in the Middle East countries that receive billions from the U.S. Tax dollars repress Christianity. This is the next big point that he makes. So he goes on. So where's our State Department in all this? The State Department, who spends a lot of time looking out for human rights of people in countries we can't pronounce, they ignore it. When was the last time the United States pushed another country to treat Christians better? Well, in some cases, it would be pretty easy to do that. we could demand that Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Afghanistan, countries we're dependent on, who are dependent on us, implement full freedom of religion before we give them any more U.S. aid. And this, again, he sort of is making a good point here in that we should be stopping the relationships that we have with countries like Saudi Arabia. He is making a good point that we shouldn't be funneling tax dollars into repressive regimes who, among many other things, repress certain types of religion, including Christianity in some cases. But he's covering that with this assumption that the left is the side that wants us to have these relationships. And that's dishonest and untrue. The United States, we barely ever tell anybody, by the way. We're not in the business of telling people and stepping in for the cause of human rights. Basically, we use condemnation of a certain type of human rights abuse as a type of political currency in areas of the world in which we have, material, resource, whatever you want to call it, interests. Those are the facts. If you look at where we send all of our aid and where our military is, it's always where the resources are. That should be an obvious fact. And so to claim that the United States is consistently going around and protecting every other religion, but that we're just ignoring Christianity's plight in certain parts of the world, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. Written by or spoken by.
That has to make it on a fucking blooper reel.